Cloud. Can people on Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll be starting shortly. I'll make an announcement, so I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to turn your devices to mute. Just stand right there. Stand right there so I could just adjust it. Perfect.
So when you run the titles on this, Bart needs to be credited as the key grip on this particular film. You can put this in Mr. Bookatz.
I'm going to tell them to come on over.
I don't know if they're planning more people are coming. I'm sure that there may be grandchildren, nieces and nephews signing on to Zoom, but I don't know if they're all there either. Oh, we're already pretty close to the time.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I'm not normally as early as I was for this service. So.
Do you want to do Priya first?
Yeah.
Well, when would you like to have it?
I wanted to say they got it set up right here.
What? If they want one. I'm going to ask people to mute your devices. We're going to begin our service.
Adonai, Ma'on Ata Hayita Lanu, Bador Bador. God, you've been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before the earth and the world, you are God. You decree that we must return to dust. In your sight, 1,000 years are as yesterday when it has passed as a watch in the night. But you engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak it flourishes, at dusk it withers. The span of our life is 80 years and 10, given strength 80 years or more. But the best of those years include trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily before we are in darkness. Teach us, therefore, O God, to number our days, to count each day precious, that we acquire a heart of wisdom. Amen. El Harachamam, sweet God, you've taken a beloved one from us. She held such a precious place in our hearts. She is missed already. Our friends grieve in a darkened world. In their tears, in their silence, they are lamenting. Be with them, God, hear them. For Eunice's love that united us in life, death cannot sever. Her companionship shared along life's path. This continues now in the tenderness of memory. The gifts of her heart and mind that brought joy and happiness. They are a precious remembrance to us. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures, which brings us the ever new message of God's nearness and our family's nearness to one another in darkness, in light, in joy and sorrow, in life and in death. Psalm 15 reads, Adonai mi yagur ba'ohalecha mi yishkon b'har kodshecha. God, who abides in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth in their heart, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may do not retract, who would never exploit others, never take bribes, those who live in this way, the way in which Eunice Wertheim lived. They shall never, ever be shaken. Dear friends, with the sun on the back of my neck, I'm reminded of what I shared yesterday, that I recall the last time gathered with this particular family at a safer time in the world, of course. It was a rather warm day for December. We were standing in bright sunlight in this cemetery when Richard died, just as Hanukkah was drawing near. It's always been a time rich with meaning, living a life of light and determination. But today we gather in the final days of Sukkot, and as our synagogue community prepares itself tomorrow night to rejoice and read the concluding verses of the Torah and the new verses that begin again. Eunice would want us to be reminded that she died the day before what would have been the 118th birthday of her father Albert. What an auspicious day, an auspicious time to draw meaning for the choices and values that animate her long life. Let us pore over her choices, her values, no less than we would the verses of Deuteronomy or Genesis. For what will be unrolled tomorrow, similar to what we unroll now in our hearts, the teachings and ways of a sage human being. As you may know, the Torah doesn't end on a happy ending. It ends with a eulogy, a tribute to a life properly lived. Only after paying tribute to Moses at the conclusion of the Torah are his children and the Israelites given the task of carrying on in his spirit, in the memory of someone long respected. Among the first biblical verses that begin just after the conclusion of the Torah, in chapter 1 of Joshua, we read, Lo yamush sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha. Do not let this book depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, carry out what is written in it, that you may be successful in your enterprise, that you may do well. And Joshua continues, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and of good courage. Do not be disheartened, for I, the eternal God, am with you wherever you go. It is apropos that as such rich holiday and traditions arise to us, that we consider today the legacy that Eunice leaves for us. As we mourn her, it will be natural to wonder how to develop the strength and courage she had inside of her to reach out to others. I've known her for the last 11 years of her life. We enjoyed talking and kibitzing and connecting, like she did with everyone. Count me into that family. I can say to you without reservation that the affection she carried for those around her, her belief in all of you, you who could gather here today in Cleveland, and those who are watching this on Zoom live or later on. Those who could be physically present with us and those who it's impossible to travel. All of you, each of you, you were such gifts to her. You were her strength and her courage, and she held you close until the conclusion of her life, believing in your capacity to leave her here at rest alongside Richard. I must say, if any of us get to live 87 years, I hope we are as certain as Eunice seemed to be that the memories we made in that time, that the holidays we celebrated, the teachings and values that we held close to our lips and to our hearts, to do what is right, to learn and expand our minds, to express ourselves in creativity and self-sufficiency, even when the fiber of our character is tested. These are things that Eunice would be doing right now if she were seated among us, helping us to mourn for a different friend or family member. She'd be holding us close and instructing us to hold life close. So with appreciation for the life she lived, all the honor it took to make her strength endure, her chazak, her amas, her strength and courage, they don't die with her. They are ours now. We gather here with Jim and Candy, Steve and Melinda, and our hearts ache with yours. You've had the blessing of your mom's kinship so deep into your lifetimes. As we've been talking in recent days, your gratitude. One moment here. Okay, click the pages in the wrong order. Your gratitude is so apparent, and it is clear that you knew it well. Dear brother-in-law Stan and sister-in-law Sally here in Cleveland, sister-in-law Linda, wife of Norman, may his memory be a blessing, watching and sending blessings from a distance. Along with nephews Justin, Jordan, Darren and his Shiloh, and local nieces Carol, Kathy and her David. In a few moments, Steve will speak on behalf of him and his brother, and I've been sent loving memories that I will include from grandchildren Alex, Robert and his Borum, Meredith and her Andy. These people, alongside Eve and her Daniel, Julia and her Michael, Dr. Jacqueline and her David, you have all the privilege today of knowing you were the most admired persons in Eunice's life. To borrow a sports metaphor, your grandma left it all out on the field. Her pride, her affection, as she talked of you often, as she felt whether you were near or far. She loved that she got to live to meet Audrey, Miles, Guy, Remy, and Liza, and was so wishing the limitations of her body's strength would have allowed her to meet the great-grandchildren soon to come into this family. But you'll all just have to explain even further to the newest little ones how special your grandma Eunice was to you. Eunice was born here in Cleveland in March of 1933, the oldest of the two children of Albert and Gertrude Cass. At the time she entered the world, their family home was at 105th and St. Clair, near a grocery store owned by Eunice's uncle. Ultimately, Eunice and Norman's parents, both Russian immigrants, moved to South Euclid, and the two of them proceeded through their local educations at Heights High School. She grew up attending the Park Synagogue, where she was confirmed in 1949. To the time of her death, Eunice kept close friends that she made from that period of her life as a teenager, studying at Heights. She stayed up to date on their comings and goings the way she did with all of her relatives, calling, kibitzing, connecting with them. Although both of them had lived in Cleveland and were gently acquainted, Eunice truly met Dick at the University of Miami, when he was a senior, a business major, and she was just an entering freshman. Although they had only met mid-autumn, they became very close very swiftly and stayed connecting with one another over winter break. That was long enough to convince them that they were in the presence of someone whose soul they adored. You might say Eunice changed her major to Dick and the life that they would build. That was her matriculation, even as he completed his studies at Miami. In anticipation of Dick's funeral 5 years ago, Eunice said to Cantor Sager, "After that, the rest is history." In fact, it's not simple to make history for 62 years of a marriage, building a life of laughter, love, care, and concern, devotion, and loyalty. She so appreciated how endeared and good Richard became to her parents, and they loved seeing how attentive, caring, supportive, helpful, and loving he was to her. They were married on July 29, 1953, here in Cleveland. I have here in my folder today their membership application to the YPC, the Young People's Congregation of Anshe Chesed, dated in pencil in what I think is Richard's handwriting. In addition, someone at Temple saved a news clipping that I just shared with the family, detailing his appointment at a later date to the manager position at Watkins Furniture at Severance Center. It details his background, his volunteer activities, but most importantly, the home he and Eunice shared on Dogwood Trail with their two sons. Indeed, from the birth of Stephen on the 1st of April, 1956, and Jim's birth a few years later on New Year's Day, you guys really have something for holidays, don't you? Eunice's life was filled and transformed to focus on making sure her kids had a caregiver, a cheerleader, a champion for them when they would face doubts or dilemmas, and the keeper of a safe and loving and conspicuously clean household. Steve told me that it seemed to him that her goal from the time she became a parent and forward was to caretake for them. Earlier in their life, to get them to activities, orienting her priorities about what would make him and Jim and their dad happy. Her hobbies included making all of her own clothes, loving music, fashion, and painting. Steve said she might have even made a couple of his art projects for school on his behalf, and was more than a little peeved when, let's just say, the teacher didn't give her the desired grade on his project. Jim said his mom loved to cook and was quite talented at making chicken soup, brisket, and flank steak, as long as you liked it well done and didn't mind the fire alarm going off. But he loved seeing his kids, and his kids make memories and joy with sleepovers at Grandma and Grandpa's house. Steve's kids loved the same when their grandparents would travel, sleep over at their home. Jim remembers with fondness how much it meant to him that Eunice was so excited for Robert's semester in Japan that she traveled all the way across the world to see him there. Robert shared with me in a note that he sent that before he left for his year abroad, his grandma would take him out to lunch once a week at a Japanese restaurant, even though she couldn't eat almost anything on the menu. The only thing she was concerned about was spending time with him and making him happy. During the program's spring break, she would make an unforgettable visit with him. He wrote, "Our trip in Japan was one I'll never forget. She powered through a 14-hour flight and overcame jet lag at the age of 75. We traveled the country together on a rigorous schedule, and she never missed a beat. She was never afraid to venture outside of her comfort zone, even if dietary restrictions got us kicked out of a few restaurants in the process." He added that although he's only known his grandma for what would be a small portion of her almost 9 decades, that he is truly grateful for all the time they were able to spend together, visiting with her and Grandpa on Saturdays as kids to weekly dinners at Hunan's by the Falls. She was always an important and ever-present part of his life. One of the many fond childhood memories he has of his grandma is baking together with her. One time, they were trying to make chocolate soufflés, but in the end, they didn't rise quite as expected. Grandma joked that they had inadvertently made chocolate lava cake, and they laughed together and ate what must have been a delicious, if undercooked, cake batter. She had a way of putting a positive spin on everything and laughing off the mistakes. Robert says that his grandma's devotion to all of her family, that was her purpose. It was clear that she thrived on bringing others joy. She showed unconditional support, had a profound sense of empathy few others possess. And although nothing ever can replace the huge role she plays in her grandchildren's lives, Robert says he can find solace in remembering the wonderful times they did have together. Grandson Alex added in a note sent to me hours ago that it's painful to imagine a world without Grandma Eunice. Her influence on our lives, both as children and adults, is indelible, especially impressions and memories of Cleveland. We remember so many things about her fondly. She made an extraordinary effort to get to know us deeply and be aware of what was happening in our lives. When I would talk with Grandma Eunice, she made me feel like even the most mundane updates were very interesting. She was a great listener, always patient, never judgmental. Grandma Eunice had a way of making you feel confident that every choice you were making was the right one, and she was proud of you for making it. He continued to praise that his grandma's energy and liveliness would be infectious. It was incredible to see how active and vivacious she was, well into her 80s, traveling widely both with Grandpa Dick and with us, and was intimately knowledgeable about and respectful of cultures vastly different from her own, both a great appreciator of art and a skillful artist herself, as we all admired her paintings. He adds that he continues to think about dinners at her house often. She was a wonderful cook, but the warmth and comfort of her home left an even deeper impression. It is impossible for him to imagine visiting Cleveland without stopping by Grandma Eunice's house. We've enjoyed so many meaningful events in her home, birthdays, Jewish holidays. We will miss her tremendously. While she is no longer with us, I'm grateful that her imprint on our lives will persist, and that our remembrances of her are filled with joy and love. Finally, granddaughter Meredith wrote the following words, which I would like to share. On behalf of all the grandchildren, we feel lucky and blessed to have had so many years with Grandma. So involved in our lives, never missing or forgetting a milestone, graduation, birthday, or grandparents' day at school. You could talk to her for hours on the phone.
I'm making a list.
And would know she was truly listening.
I'm writing it down. I'm making
always
a list.
wanting to know how us and our kids are doing. She was happiest when we were happiest. Here are just some of the memories that we have and will never forget with Grandma. She was an incredible cook and shared that love with us. We remember spending the night with her and making blueberry pancakes the next morning. They were a staple at breakfast time. She would let us shake the batter and always made sure we had more food than we could ever attempt to eat. We loved playing together in the basement of her house where she played. She kept plenty of toys and games for us. We spent hours playing Hungry Hippos and doing art projects with her. And there were many trips to Cedar Point with Grandma and Grandpa. They'd come home so proud of all the stuffed animals and prizes they helped us win, they would never go home empty-handed. Meredith adds that her grandma was meticulous at creating photo albums for each of the grandchildren and keeping detailed files of all our artwork. If it came from a grandchild, she would never throw it away. She also feels so grateful that Grandma got to spend time with our children, her 5 great-grandchildren thus far. We will continue to share memories of Grandma with them and keep her memory alive. Friends, that's what we're here to do. To pledge from this moment going forward, as long as we live, we will keep her memory alive. Rabbi Chaim Stern wrote the following words about how to do just that. He wrote, "The light of life is a finite flame. Life is kindled, it burns, it glows, it's radiant with warmth and beauty, but it fades. Its substance is consumed, it is no more. In light we see, in light we are seen. The flames dance and our life burns, and then it burns down in gutters. There is an end to the flames, we see no more, and we are no more seen. But we do not despair, for we are more than a memory slowly fading into the darkness. With our lives we give life, and thus we move in the eternal cycle of darkness, death, light, and life. These words convey my prayer today for each of you, mourning for Eunice, for all of us, remembering this beautiful light in our community. She'd probably reject that idea and all this grand talk. She'd want us to be quelling and talking about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren by now. We can learn a lot from her. Let's do that. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may God grant us the strength and God's will to do just that. Amen.
Dear friends, Eunice Wertheim was one of those people I loved to see. She was so easy to greet, to catch up with, and in an exchange of stories and anecdotes about our families, our activities, our plans. She was always upbeat, happy, on the move, engaged, focused on a dozen interests, running to a myriad of social engagements. She was a vital, dynamic, energetic presence. Even though we didn't see each other that often, I always felt that we shared a special bond, a mutual warmth, an instinctive affection for each other, an effortless connection, a simpatico. When we did see each other, we would engage instantly and easily in animated conversation. As we shared our most recent exercise routines, our appreciation of each other's fashion sense, the books we were reading, the theater or art exhibits we might have seen, the concerts we may have attended, the travels we were planning or had recently completed. It always felt as if we had picked up in the middle of a conversation and left off again with a great deal more to say. As Rabbi Nosenchuk and I were discussing our shared sense of loss, I realized that was her gift. She made everyone feel special, which is part of why today feels so wrong. At a time when so much of our lives seems to have an unreal quality, I confess that standing here in this cemetery at the grave of Eunice Wertheim also seems amiss, in error, mistaken, an experience completely at odds with our sense of the way life should be, with the way we expect it to be, with the way we want it to be. Her death is one more strange circumstance that fights with our perception of reality and our experience of her, which was altogether joyous. It is appropriate that we should gather today during our festival of Sukkot, the holiday that celebrates the harvest, and on which we are commanded, V'samachta b'chagecha, v'hayita ach sameach, to rejoice in our festival and to be altogether joyous. Eunice Wertheim lived her life with daily joy in the bounty of God's gifts to her. How grateful we are for having been included in the abundant harvest of her years as she rejoiced in the festival of her life.
Thank you, Rabbi and Cantor. Lovely. When I came to see my mom 2 weeks ago for what I think we knew was going to be the last time, as I was driving to her house, I realized there was a lot of things about her that I didn't know. She grew up, as the rabbi mentioned, with two parents who were Russian immigrants who came without their parents, and yet they worked. My grandfather worked in a clothing factory. My grandmother worked as a clerk in the grocery store. Yet they moved to Cleveland Heights so that she and my uncle could go to high school, and then they both went to college in the South. And so I said to her, Mom, how did they get the money? I mean, they didn't come with anything. They couldn't have been making very much. And she said, I have no idea, but we always buy clothes, and they sent us to school, and we never felt like we lacked for anything. She was very weak at that point, yet as I walked in the door, she got out of the bed and dragged herself out of the bed, came down the stairs, which was hard for her, and insisted on making me food, which I told her I didn't want and I didn't need, but she made me a lunch, which was her usual thing, and even though I said, Mom, don't do that, she said yes. And then we went outside. She loved her garden, and she would have loved a day like this. And we sat in her backyard, and she was talking about her life. And she talked about my dad. She talked about Jimmy and I. And I will mention that she was so grateful. Jimmy, who lived here in Cleveland, I lived out of town, had the day-to-day task of dealing with their medical issues. Even though he was the lawyer, they always consulted him on the medical issues that they had. But she was so grateful for what good care that he took of them in their last years as needed more. And then she was, as I said, very weak, and she talked about the two of us, and she was proud of us. And then she started talking about the grandchildren, and she started getting more animated and more happy. And then she started talking about the great-grandchildren, and I had to calm her down because I thought she was going to jump off the chair. But she, even with all of her other interests and skills, family and friends were what was really important to her. And she had lifelong friends that she cherished and she kept in contact with. She loved the family, and her legacy will be that, you know, at the end of the day, it's family and friends that are the most important thing in life. Those are the things that we just should cherish, and we will continue that legacy for her, and we thank her for giving that and everything she has done for so many people.
I invite you to rise for the El Male prayer.
מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, אם קדושים וטהורים כזורקים נשיא בטובה שלך לעולמה. ועל הרחמים יסתירה בסתר פניו לעולמים. ביצרו החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה ותנוע ושלום על נשאבה Compassionate God, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Eunice Wertheim, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us say,
At the point where you're going to be lowered in the casket, you see it now. Okay, come on.
That's a good thought. Not good enough, but
Can we remind people, please put your devices on mute?
I don't know how.
Great shot!
no. Can't tell. See, that's why. Absolutely. And well, that's why I'm always praying. But you know, when you have your earphones in, I'm not sure. I guess it could have you. I don't know. Laura, the music.
We continue now with recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish, ancient and mysterious words, which actually never mention death, only our continued faith in life and God's protection over all humanity. At the conclusion of this memorial prayer, we'll invite you, if you wish, to conduct what the rabbis call the Chesed Shel Emet, the final kindness. We can assist someone in their assistance in their burial. We offer the words of the Kaddish slowly with love and memory. I invite you to rise wherever you are. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon u'b'yomechon u'b'chayei lechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kariv ve'imru. Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Ulalmei Amaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpoar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shemei V'kudisha V'rechu Le'ela Min Kol V'yirchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Ta'amiran Ve'alma V'yimru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. Useh shalom b'mrama. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch sha'ar b'lei Tzion b'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you, each of you, among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Although this concludes our ritual at graveside, I want to acknowledge again to family and friends that at Fairmount Temple's Shabbat services tomorrow evening, our Yizkor services for the concluding day of Sukkot on Saturday morning. We'll be reciting Eunice's name with honor and love before the memorial prayer. And throughout this month of Shloshim, the first 30 days, our deepest and most precious condolences to you all for the loss of this incredible human being. Thank you.
This ends our Zoom service. Thank you.